The sun dipped low behind the sandstone cliffs, spilling amber light across the rugged lands of the southwest. Wind carried the scent of sage and dust, whispering through the dry grass and over the rocks that held the stories of 1,000 years. It was the kind of evening that wrapped the desert in silence, where every sound a distant hawk, the creak of an old wagon wheel, the faint rustle of wind seemed to mean something. In that silence, destiny stirred quietly, preparing strangers to cross paths in a way neither could have imagined. He stood near the river's edge, water glinting like melted bronze beneath the fading sky. The Navajo warrior was alone, stripped to his waist, his skin glistening with water from his evening wash. He had returned from months of journey, a time spent between war and wandering, seeking peace that always seemed to drift farther away. The land was his teacher, the wind his companion, and yet even he could feel that something was missing. It was not food, nor rest, nor shelter. It was something deeper, a quiet ache in the soul that he could never name. The river had always been sacred to him. He had bathed there as a child under his mother's watchful eyes, and later returned as a man to cleanse himself after battles that left marks no water could wash away. He never expected the calm of that evening to be broken by anything human. But fate, it seemed, had a way of entering softly and changing everything, far from the riverbank. A young woman stumbled through the wild terrain, clutching at her torn skirt as she tried to find her way. Her journey had begun miles away. In a small settlement that had long since disappeared from sight, she had fled from something, though even she couldn't fully name it. The world had changed so fast, and she had been swept along without knowing where she belonged anymore. Dust clung to her shoes, and her breath came shallow as she followed. The faint sound of water, praying it would lead her somewhere safe. Her horse had bolted hours ago when lightning split the sky without warning. She had been traveling alone, carrying what little she had left in a leather satchel. Now all she had was hope. Fragile, desperate hope that the sound of running water meant life. The path grew steeper, and rocks loosened beneath her boots. The faint murmur of the river grew louder until, in her hurry, her foot slipped. For one breathless second, the world spun, then she plunged forward, crashing through brush and sand until cold water swallowed her with a gasp. The warrior turned sharply at the sound, the sudden splash breaking the stillness. His eyes narrowed, instinct sharpening like a blade. Without hesitation, he stepped into the water, moving with the ease of someone who knew every bend of the river. The current wasn't strong, but for someone unused to it, the shock of cold and panic could be enough to pull them under. He reached the spot just as she surfaced, coughing and gasping, her hair clinging to her face. For a moment, neither spoke. He caught her arm firmly, his strength steady but not harsh, and guided her toward the shallows. The woman looked up at him, eyes wide, half fear, half disbelief. The sight before her seemed almost unreal. The man's dark hair, tied loosely at his neck, dripped with river water. His chest bore scars that spoke of battles long past, but his gaze held calm steadiness. He was like part of the earth itself, strong, silent, unshakable. She tried to speak, but her voice trembled. I didn't mean to be still, he said quietly, his accent thick, but his tone gentle. You'll catch the chill if you stay in the water. Something in his presence disarmed her. She didn't know his name or his story, but she felt oddly safe, a strange warmth spreading through the shock of the moment. He led her to the bank where his small campfire flickered between stones. Her hands shook as she tried to steady herself, glancing at the few belongings near his fire: a folded blanket, a carved wooden bowl, a small pouch of herbs. You came from the east, he said after a long silence, his gaze moving toward the hills she'd fallen from. Those trails are rough. No one crosses them without reason. She hesitated, unsure if she should tell the truth. My horse ran off. I was just trying to find the road again. He didn't press her, though his eyes told her he didn't fully believe it. The desert had its way of revealing truth through silence. He poured warm water from a small pot and handed her a piece of dried cloth. She accepted it, still unsure what to make of him. In the dim firelight, she studied his face. The sharp lines, the quiet steadiness, the way he seemed to belong completely to this land. It was unlike anyone she had ever met. Something about him carried an old strength, a gentleness born not of softness, but of understanding. What do they call you? she asked softly. He paused, as if measuring her intentions. They call me Lone Hawk, he said finally. And you? She hesitated. Names carried weight, especially when given to strangers. But something in her wanted him to know. Eliza, she said quietly. My name is Eliza. Shh. The wind stirred the fire, and for a moment neither spoke. Above them, the stars began to emerge, bright and endless. It was a silence that wasn't empty, but full of something unspoken. She looked at the land stretching beyond, so vast and untamed, and felt a strange sense of belonging she hadn't known before. Maybe it was the air, maybe the quiet, or maybe the man beside her who seemed both fierce and kind. Lone Hawk studied her with the eyes of someone who had learned to read truth beyond words. There was something in her, not just fear, but strength hidden beneath it. She reminded him of something he thought he had lost long ago. You should rest, he said, breaking the silence. There's danger in traveling at night. She nodded, but her heart still raced from the closeness of him, from the way his presence seemed to fill the night. She lay near the fire, watching its soft glow reflect off the water. For the first time in days, her body began to relax, though her mind refused to quiet. He moved quietly by the river, tending to his horse and checking the tracks nearby. Something about her sudden appearance troubled him. The land had been restless lately, signs of riders, footprints near the edge of his hunting grounds. He couldn't tell yet whether her coming was chance or warning. From her spot by the fire, Eliza watched him. The way he moved, steady, graceful, alert, told her he was used to danger. She wondered what kind of life he lived out here, away from the noise of towns and roads. He seemed both wild and grounded, like the river itself, untamed yet constant. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, it carried uneasy dreams. She saw flashes of the storm, the lightning splitting the sky, the cries of her horse fading into the wind. Then she saw his face again, the calm eyes watching her as she fell. When dawn crept across the horizon, she woke to the sound of footsteps. Lone Hawk stood near the water, his gaze fixed on something in the distance. His jaw was tight, his posture tense. She sat up, heart quickening. What is it? She asked. He didn't turn immediately. Riders, he said finally. 3 of them, maybe more. Not from my people. Her stomach dropped. She knew instantly who they might be, the same men she had been running from. The same faces she had prayed never to see again. He turned to her, eyes sharp but calm. You should tell me what you're running from, he said quietly. Before it reaches us. The wind carried the sound of distant hooves, faint but growing. She looked at him, fear flickering in her eyes, and realized that her fall into his river had not been an accident. Fate had brought her here to this. Warrior, to this land, to this moment that would decide everything. But before she could speak, the echo of the riders grew louder. The calm river that had first joined their paths now reflected the first signs of trouble. The warrior's hand tightened around his bow as he turned toward the sound, ready for whatever was coming next. The air grew heavier with the coming dawn, the kind that carried quiet warnings before the day began. The soft light spilled over the canyon walls, stretching long shadows across the sand. Lone Hawk stood tall at the edge of the river, eyes narrowed, toward the distant rise where the faint rhythm of hooves echoed again. The sound was still far away, but it was steady, moving closer with purpose. He didn't need to see the riders to know they were following something or someone. Behind him, Eliza stood slowly, brushing dust from her dress, her hands trembling. She felt the old fear crawl up her spine, the kind that had haunted her since she left the settlement. For days she had been running, hoping the land would hide her. But now, here in this quiet valley, safety had turned fragile. He turned to her, his gaze sharp but not unkind. You know them, he said simply. Her throat tightened. I think so, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. They came 2 nights ago. They wanted something from me. She hesitated, then met his eyes. I ran because I couldn't give it. He didn't ask what it was, not yet. His instincts told him that knowing too much too fast could lead to trouble. Instead, he moved closer to the fire, kicking dirt over it until only smoke rose into the cool morning air. We can't stay here, he said. They'll find this camp, Eliza nodded, though her legs felt weak. She glanced at his horse, a tall chestnut with a strong build, and then at the rocky path leading west. The land looked endless, each ridge blending into another. "Where will we go?" She asked. "To the cliffs," he replied. "There's a place my people once used. They won't find us there easily." He handed her a small pouch of dried berries and motioned for her to follow. She slung her satchel over her shoulder and tried to match his pace as they began to climb the uneven trail. The path wound upward, bordered by sagebrush and stones still damp from the river mist. The morning sun painted the horizon in shades of gold and rose, yet neither of them looked back. For a while they walked in silence, broken only by the steady rhythm of their steps and the cry of a distant hawk overhead. When they reached higher ground, Eliza paused, her breath coming hard. "You said this place belonged to your people," she said. "Do they still live here?" He stopped, glancing toward the vast stretch of land below. "Not anymore," he said quietly. "Most were taken east when the soldiers came. Some fled into the mountains. The rest. The land remembers them, even if no one else does." His words carried weight, and for a moment she felt the sadness behind them. She wanted to ask more, but the look in his eyes told her that some stories weren't meant for daylight. Still, there was something comforting in the way he spoke, as if every word came from truth, not pride. They reached a small ridge where the ground leveled out, and he stopped beside a group of rocks shaped like old pillars. From there, the view opened wide, a sea of desert stretching endlessly. Below, faint trails cut through the brush, signs of travelers long gone. He studied the horizon for movement before signaling for her to rest, as she sat. Eliza's mind drifted back to the settlement she had left behind. It had been a rough place, a mix of traders, soldiers, and drifters, chasing promises of land and gold. She had come there with her uncle after her parents died in the fever that swept through their town. Her uncle had always told her that the world was full of danger for a woman alone, and he was right. When a group of men came demanding something that had once belonged to her father, a map, or maybe a letter, everything changed. She hadn't understood why it was so important, but she knew enough to run now, sitting in the wide silence of this canyon. She wondered if that single choice had set her on a path that could never turn back. Lone Hawk watched her quietly. He could see the weight she carried, though she tried to hide it. There was a story in her eyes, something deeper than fear, something that spoke of loss and courage both. He knew that kind of pain well, the kind that never truly left but taught you to endure. When he finally spoke again, his voice was low. "The men chasing you," he said, "they're not just after you. They're after something you carry." She looked up, startled. "How do you know that?" "Because no one rides this land at dawn without reason," he said. "They would not follow you this far unless they believed you had something worth finding." Her hand instinctively went to the small satchel at her side. Inside, hidden beneath a worn piece of fabric, was the folded map her father had drawn years ago, a map to something she never fully understood. He had spoken of it only once before he died, saying it marked the resting place of something precious from their ancestors. She had thought it was just one of his stories, but after he passed, her uncle hid it away like a secret too heavy to be shared. "They think it leads to gold," she said softly. "But it's not gold. My father said it was something sacred, something that didn't belong to any man." The warrior studied her face, sensing the truth in her voice. "Your father was a wise man," he said. "Many things are sacred in this land. Too many have been taken by those who see only what they can hold." His tone carried both respect and warning, as if he knew the danger that came with such a secret. As they spoke, the wind began to shift. He glanced toward the east and frowned. "We should move again," he said. "The riders may find the river soon." They packed quickly, moving along the ridge until they reached a narrow opening between the rocks. It led to a hidden hollow surrounded by cliffs and shaded by twisted pines. A small spring trickled nearby, its sound soft and steady. It was the kind of place only someone who belonged to the land would know. Eliza looked around in wonder. "No one would find this," she said quietly. "That's why it's safe," he replied, tying his horse to a low branch. "We'll stay until the sun falls." She nodded, and sank down beside the spring, feeling exhaustion pull at her bones. As she rested, he began to prepare a small meal, moving with quiet precision. The rhythm of his actions, gathering wood, grinding herbs, checking the wind, carried a sense of calm that eased her nerves. After a while, she found herself watching him, noticing how he seemed to listen to the land as if it spoke to him. He didn't waste movement or words, and yet there was gentleness in everything he did. "You live alone out here?" she asked softly. He looked up briefly. "For some time now," he said. "My people scattered after the wars. I stayed to keep what was left, the songs, the stories, the ways of the old ones. The land keeps me company." There was no bitterness in his voice, only quiet acceptance. She felt a strange pull toward that peace, the kind that came not from comfort, but from understanding. "You could have left," she said, "gone somewhere new." He smiled faintly. A tree does not walk away from its roots. His words lingered in her mind long after. By afternoon, the air turned warmer, and the sound of insects filled the canyon. She dozed for a while, but when she woke, he was standing on the ridge again, bow in hand. She followed his gaze and saw faint dust rising in the distance, the kind stirred by horses. Her heart pounded. "They found the river," she said. He nodded slowly. "They'll follow your trail until it fades, but they won't stop." Fear tightened her chest, but before she could speak, he said, "You are not alone anymore. Whatever they want, they'll have to come through me first." Something in his words, the quiet promise, the certainty, steadied her trembling. She didn't know why he would risk himself for her, stranger, but deep down, she felt that he meant it. As the sun began to sink, the world turned gold again. Shadows stretched long across the valley, and the faint sound of hooves grew louder, echoing between the cliffs. Lone Hawk reached for his quiver, eyes fixed on the horizon. Eliza stood behind him, clutching the map hidden in her satchel, feeling the weight of her father's secret pressing against her heart. The men chasing her were close now, close enough that she could feel the tremor of their approach through the ground. The warrior's voice broke the silence. "When they come, stay low and do not run. Fear makes the wrong path look safe." She nodded, her pulse racing. The wind picked up again, scattering sand across the rocks, carrying the first scent of danger. And as the sky deepened into dusk, she realized the journey that had begun with a fall into the river was far from over. The truth her father had hidden, the past the warrior carried, and the men riding toward them all were about to collide in ways neither of them could yet see. The sky dimmed into a deep rust as dusk settled across the canyon. Every color of the desert seemed sharper in that fading light, the red cliffs, the pale sage, the gold of the dry grass bending under the wind. Lone Hawk crouched behind a boulder near the edge of the hollow, his hand resting on the curve of his bow. He watched the horizon without blinking, his body still but ready. He could hear them now, 3 riders moving slow, cautious, following the faint trail Eliza had left before the wind began to shift. Eliza knelt beside the spring, trying to steady her breath. The ground beneath her felt alive with every hoofbeat that echoed through the land. Fear pressed hard against her ribs, but beneath it was something else, anger. She had spent weeks running, never stopping long enough to fight back, and now she was tired of being hunted. Her hand brushed the satchel at her side, the leather soft from use, and she thought again of her father's voice, the way he had spoken of the map like it was both a gift and a curse. Lone Hawk motioned for her to stay silent. He moved up the ridge like a shadow, scanning the lower path. From there he could see the riders more clearly, 3 men dressed in worn dusters, their horses slick with sweat. The one in front had a hat pulled low, his rifle slung across his back. Lone Hawk studied their movements. They weren't soldiers, not by the way they rode. Mercenaries, maybe, or treasure hunters. Men who valued gold more than life. He turned back and whispered, "They'll reach the river soon. When they see the tracks end, they'll spread out." "What if they come this way?" she asked. "Then they find nothing," he said. "We leave no sign." He began to cover the ground with loose sand, smoothing over the faint prints near the spring. She helped him, her fingers trembling as she pushed dirt over her own footprints. Every sound seemed louder: the scrape of stone, the rustle of wind, the soft trickle of water. When they finished, he pointed toward the narrow path deeper into the rocks. "There's a cave ahead," he said. "We'll stay there till they pass." The cave was small, hidden behind a curtain of vines and brush. Inside, it smelled of earth and pine, cool and quiet. They sat close to the wall, the flicker of their small lamp barely touching the edges. Outside, the faint murmur of voices drifted through the still air. Eliza tensed. "They're close," she whispered. Lone Hawk listened, his brow furrowed. He could make out fragments of their talkmen arguing about the direction of the tracks, the sound of spurs scraping rock. Then one voice rose above the rest, rough and certain. "She can't be far. The river led her straight here. That map's worth more than any of us'll see again. Keep your eyes open." Lone Hawk's hand tightened around his bow. The nameless hunger in that man's tone was familiar. He'd seen it before in soldiers who burned villages, in traders who cut land from his people's hands. It was greed, pure and dangerous. The riders lingered for a while, scanning the ridge. One dismounted and began to climb. Lone Hawk motioned for Eliza to stay low. The man's boots scraped against the rocks above them. Each sound seemed to echo through her chest. She held her breath until the man's voice called out, "Nothing here. Let's move west before we lose the light." After the sound of hooves faded, did she exhale. Her hands shook against the dirt floor. "They're still searching," Lone Hawk said quietly. "They won't stop until they find what they came for." Eliza looked at him, fear and guilt tangled in her eyes. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she said. "If I hadn't brought the map," he shook his head. "This land has seen worse than men chasing maps. You did what you had to." But even as he said it, he knew this wasn't over. Men like that didn't give up easily. They would circle back when they realized the trail ended too cleanly. He had bought them time, not safety. As night deepened, they lit a small fire near the cave mouth, its glow barely visible. She sat beside it, hugging her knees, while he checked his arrows one by one. "You've fought before," she said after a long silence. He nodded. "Too many times. I fought for my people when the soldiers came. Then for the land when they tried to take that too. Now I fight only when I must." She watched the way he moved, careful, deliberate, every gesture purposeful. "You don't seem afraid," she said. He smiled faintly. "Fear's not an enemy. It keeps you alive if you learn to listen to it." For a while, the silence between them was steady, like the rhythm of the desert wind. She wanted to believe they were safe, but a part of her knew the storm had only just begun. The next morning, they rose before sunrise. Lone Hawk led her along a narrow trail that twisted through the rocks until they reached higher ground. From there, they could see far across the desert a vast stretch of emptiness broken by the faint line of the river and, beyond it, a distant ridge of mesas glowing under the dawn. "That's where they'll go next," he said, pointing toward the mesas. "They'll think you followed the river west. We'll move north instead." "Where will that take us?" she asked. "To my people's old land," he said. "Few go there now. It's sacred ground." They began the long walk through the high desert. The sun rose quickly, turning the air dry and sharp. Hours passed with little talk. Eliza's feet ached, and her skin burned from the heat, but she didn't complain. She had learned that silence was part of survival. When they finally stopped under the shade of a rock outcrop, Lone Hawk shared what little food they had. The stillness of the land pressed in around them, yet it wasn't empty. It was alive in ways she couldn't explain. The hum of insects, the whisper of wind against stone, even the heartbeat of the earth beneath them, it all felt connected. "You said this land was sacred," she said softly. "Why?" He looked toward the horizon. "Because it remembers. Every life, every loss, every promise left behind. My people believe the spirits never left. They wait for us to return." His words settled deep inside her. She thought of her father again, of how he used to trace the map's lines like they were something holy. Maybe he had known more about this place than he ever told her. Later, when the heat began to fade. They reached a plateau scattered with the remains of old dwelling stone walls half buried in sand, circles where fires once burned. Lone Hawk moved among them quietly, touching the weathered stones with reverence. "My mother was born here," he said. "Before they took us away," Elisa felt the ache in his voice. "Do any of your people come back?" "Some tried," he said. "But the land's not what it was. The world keeps pushing us farther away." As she looked around the ancient ruins, she began to understand what the map might truly hold, not treasure, but memory. A piece of something lost that others wanted to claim for themselves. But the piece of that moment didn't last. As the sun dipped low, Lone Hawk spotted smoke in the distance, a thin, dark line rising against the horizon. He watched it for a long time, his expression unreadable. "They found the river again," he said quietly. "They're burning what's left of my camp." Eliza's heart sank. "Then they're still following us," he nodded. "And they're closer than before." That night, the desert seemed to tighten around them. The stars burned bright overhead, but the silence was uneasy. Every sound, the rustle of wind, cry of a night bird, felt like a warning. Lone Hawk sat near the fire, sharpening his knife, while Eliza unrolled the map for the first time since she fled. She studied it under the dim light, tracing her father's faded marks. There was something written in the corner, a line she hadn't noticed before. She leaned closer, her breath catching. "These markings," she whispered. "They're not roads or trails. They're symbols." He looked over her shoulder, his gaze narrowing. "Those are the signs of my people," he said. "Old ones, from before the war." "What do they mean?" He pointed to one near the edge. "This one means home. The others, they speak of a place where the spirit and the land meet." She looked up at him, realization dawning. "Then my father didn't just draw this from memory. He must have known someone from your people, or he found something he wasn't meant to," Lone Hawk said quietly. The fire cracked between them. For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying the faint sound of something moving in the dark hoofbeats. Distant but sure. He stood abruptly, listening. "They're coming." Liza clutched the map to her chest, her heart pounding. "What do we do?" His eyes met hers, calm but fierce. "We stand where the land remembers. It will protect its own." And as the first glow of torches flickered in the distance, she knew their journey had only begun. And the truth buried in that map was about to awaken a past far greater than either of them had imagined. The night had turned heavy with silence, the kind that makes the air feel thick and alive. The faint glow of torches flickered far below the ridge, each small light a moving mark against the dark. Lone Hawk stood at the edge of the plateau, his body tense, every sense awake. The wind brought the smell of smoke, dust, and horse sweat. The men were close now, too close. Behind him, Eliza sat by the dying fire, clutching the old map against her chest. The parchment seemed to pulse in her hands, like it carried a heartbeat of its own. She could hear the low murmur of the approaching riders, and with each passing second, the sound grew clearer. Her thoughts raced back to her father, his calm voice, as he spoke of secrets the world was not ready for. His warning that there were things buried in the land meant to stay untouched. She finally understood why he had hidden the map so carefully. Lone Hawk turned to her, his face lit faintly by the orange glow. "We can't stay here," he said, his tone steady but low. "If they reach this plateau, there's nowhere to run." Her voice trembled. "Then where?" He pointed toward the dark line of cliffs to the north. "There's a canyon below. My people once used it for ceremony. No horse can follow through the narrow path. If we reach it, we might have a chance." She rose quickly, her knees weak but determined. The night air was cold, and the ground under her feet felt sharp with stone. Lone Hawk moved ahead, leading her through the ruins, his hand brushing aside the brush that hid the trail. The sky above them was endless, filled with stars that seemed to burn brighter with every step they took away from the firelight behind them. The sound of men shouting broke through the wind. A gunshot cracked the silence, echoing off the cliffs. Eliza froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Lone Hawk turned sharply and motioned for her to keep moving. They saw the fire, he said. Hurry. The path wound down steeply, each step slipping on loose gravel. He held her arm to steady her, guiding her between rocks as the torches behind them began to spread. The men were fanning out, searching, their voices carrying up the slope. She could hear them now, clearer than before. Spread out. The tracks lead this way. One shouted, another voice, rough and commanding, answered, I want that woman alive. The map too. Don't lose it this time. Her stomach tightened at the sound of that voice. She recognized it. The same man who had come to her uncle's house the night before everything changed. He had worn a soldier's coat, though he wasn't one. His name, she remembered now, was Wade. Lone Hawk noticed her sudden stillness. You know him, he said quietly. Yes, she whispered. He was the one who came looking for the map. My uncle tried to stop him. He didn't make it. Lone Hawk's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. His silence was heavy, the kind that carried promise, not of words, but of action. They reached the edge of the canyon, where a narrow crack in the stone opened into darkness. From above it looked like a shadow, easily missed unless one knew where to look. He knelt and ran his fingers along the rocks, searching. There's an old path here, he murmured. Stay close and keep your head low. They descended slowly, the walls closing around them. The air grew cooler, the light dimmer. The ground was uneven, but the deeper they went, the quieter the sounds above became. The canyon swallowed the world's noise, leaving only their breathing and the soft scrape of boots against stone. After a while, Lisa spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Why are you helping me? Truly. You could have left when you saw the danger. He didn't look back. But his answer came after a pause. Because the land chose to bring you here. It doesn't bring strangers for no reason. She didn't know what he meant, but there was a conviction in his tone that silenced her questions. As they moved deeper, the canyon began to open slightly, revealing carvings on the walls, faded symbols etched into the stone, some shaped like suns, others like spirals or hands reaching upward. Eliza traced one with her fingertips. These are the same markings on the map, she said softly. Lone Hawk's gaze followed the lines. Then your father knew this place, he said. Maybe he found what the map was meant to protect. Before she could answer, a distant noise made him stiffen. He lifted his head, listening. The echo of voices carried faintly through the canyon. The men had found the entrance. They're coming, he said. He grabbed her hand and pulled her forward. The path narrowed again, forcing them into single file. The rock walls glowed faintly with moonlight spilling from cracks above. Every sound, their footsteps, their breath, even the whisper of fabric felt too loud. Behind them, another gunshot rang out, closer this time. A bullet struck the rock wall, sending a shower of dust over them. Eliza stumbled, but Lone Hawk caught her before she fell. Keep going, he urged. We're close. They turned a corner and emerged into a wide hollow surrounded by towering cliffs. In the center stood a stone arch carved with the same ancient markings. The air here was still, heavy with something sacred. Eliza could feel it, a quiet hum beneath her skin. Like the land itself was alive. Lone Hawk's eyes moved over the carvings with reverence. This is it, he said softly. The place of meeting. My ancestors believed it was where the earth and sky touched. Lisa unfolded the map again, comparing the markings to the stones before them. There's something written here, she said, squinting at the faded ink. It says, the heart lies where shadow and light are one. He looked toward the cliffs where moonlight cut across the rock in a sharp line. Shadow and light, he repeated. It means here. But before they could look further, the sound of footsteps echoed through the canyon mouth. Torches flared in the distance, their light bouncing off the stone. Wade's voice rang out. You can't hide forever. Hand it over, and maybe you'll walk out of here alive. Lone Hawk moved in front of her, bow drawn. Stay behind me, he said quietly. Eliza gripped the map, her pulse hammering in her ears. The riders appeared one by one at the edge of the hollow, their faces ghostly in the torchlight. Wade stepped forward, his expression hard. I knew it, he said, eyes fixed on her. You led me straight to it. He raised his rifle slightly. Now, hand over the map. She shook her head. You don't understand. It's not gold you're chasing. It's sacred. He laughed, sharp and cold. Sacred doesn't fill your pockets. Lone Hawk's bowstring tightened, his aim steady. Leave, he said. This place is not yours, Wade sneered. You think I'm afraid of an old story and a man with a bow? Before the words had finished leaving his mouth, the night erupted into motion. A shot cracked the air. Lone Hawk fired at the same instant, his arrow slicing through the light. One of Wade's men fell, torch tumbling to the ground. Chaos filled the hollow as bullets struck stone, sparks flying in the dark. Eliza ducked behind a boulder, clutching the map to her chest. Heart pounding so loud she thought it would echo through the canyon, Lone Hawk moved like the wind, swift and silent. He knew these rocks, knew how sound and light twisted here. His arrows found their marks with precision, but the men were many, and their guns thundered in response. Dust rose, mixing with smoke, blurring everything. Wade's voice cut through it all. You can't win, warrior. The land's yours maybe, but the future's mine. Lone Hawk's answer came not in words but in action. He moved toward the arch, drawing Wade's fire away from Eliza. The bullets chipped stone, each one closer than the last. She wanted to scream, to run, but something kept her rooted, the strange pull of the map. The feeling that whatever her father had protected lay within this place. Then, in the chaos, she saw it. A faint light flickering from the base of the arch. Glowing through a crack in the rock, she crawled toward it, shielding the map from stray bullets. The glow pulsed brighter as she neared, humming like a heartbeat. Eliza. Lone Hawk called out when he saw her moving. Stay back. But she couldn't. The markings on the map matched perfectly with the symbols around the light. She pressed her hand against the stone, and for an instant, the canyon seemed to shudder, a deep rumble rising from the earth itself. The men froze, their torches flickering. Wade looked around, eyes wide. What's happening? He shouted. The ground trembled again, dust falling from the cliffs. The glowing light spread up the arch, illuminating the carvings like fire running through veins of stone. Lone Hawk's voice was steady, almost reverent. The land remembers. Eliza turned to him, fear and wonder mingling in her eyes. The canyon's hum grew louder, echoing like a song long buried but not forgotten. And as the light rose around them, Wade shouted for his men to fire, his greed overpowering his fear. The sound of gunfire clashed with the roar of the earth, and in that blinding moment of chaos, everything that had been buried, the truth, the danger, the power of the land itself came rushing back to life, pulling all of them toward a fate none of them could escape. The rumble of the earth shook through the canyon, louder and deeper than anything Eliza had ever felt. The glowing light from the arch grew stronger until it filled the air with a golden haze. The torches flickered and died, their flames swallowed by the strange radiance. Wade and his men stumbled, shouting in panic as the ground beneath them cracked. Lone Hawk pulled Eliza close, shielding her as rocks tumbled from above. The sound of splitting stone echoed through the canyon like thunder. Then, as suddenly as it began, the shaking stopped. The light dimmed, fading into a soft glow that hovered over the ground where the arch stood. Dust settled slowly, turning the air hazy. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the uneven breathing of the survivors. Wade stood at the edge of the hollow, staring at the glowing stone. His eyes were wide with disbelief, a mix of awe and greed. "What is it?" he whispered. Lone Hawk's voice came calm and low. "It is what your kind never understood. The heart of the land. The spirit that binds us all." Wade laughed, though it came out shaky. "Spirit or not, it's worth something. Power like that doesn't stay hidden forever." He stepped forward, reaching toward the light. Eliza shouted, "Don't!" but her voice barely reached him. As his hand neared the glow, the light flared again, brighter than before. A force burst outward, knocking him backward. He fell hard against the rocks, his rifle clattering from his grip. The glow pulsed once more, then began to fade, sinking slowly into the earth until it vanished completely. The air grew still again, and the canyon fell quiet, as if nothing had ever happened. Lone Hawk lowered his bow. "The land has chosen," he said softly. "It protects itself." Eliza looked around. Most of Wade's men had fled during the chaos, their torches vanishing into the night. Only a few remained, dazed and frightened. Wade struggled to his feet, his face pale and covered in dust. For a moment, it seemed he might try again, but then he met Lone Hawk's eyes and stopped. Something in that silent stare broke through his defiance. He turned away, limping toward the canyon mouth, disappearing into the darkness without another word. When the echoes of his steps faded, Lisa finally let out a trembling breath. "It's over," she said quietly. Lone Hawk nodded, but his gaze stayed fixed on the arch. "For now," he replied. "But the story of this place isn't done. It never is." They stayed there for a long moment, surrounded by the calm that followed the storm. The moon rose higher, silver light spilling over the cliffs. The carvings on the stones seemed softer now, as if at peace. Elisa folded the map carefully, running her fingers over its worn edges. "My father spent years protecting this," she said. "I never really understood why until now." Lone Hawk turned toward her. He understood what most forget. Some things aren't meant to be owned or sold. They're meant to be respected. She looked up at him, seeing not just the man who had saved her, but the weight of generations behind his eyes. "What will happen to this place now?" she asked. "It will sleep again," he said. "Until the world learns to listen." They left the canyon before dawn, climbing the long path back to the ridge. The first light of morning stretched across the desert, washing everything in soft gold. In the distance, the valley looked peaceful again, untouched by the chaos of the night. The horses they had hidden waited where they left them. Lone Hawk helped her mount, his movement steady despite the exhaustion written across his face. As they rode across the open plain, the horizon glowed brighter with the rising sun. Eliza felt a strange calm settle over her. The fear that had followed her since the night her uncle died began to lift, replaced by a quiet strength. She looked at the folded map in her hand, realizing it no longer led anywhere. The secret it carried had fulfilled its purpose. When they reached the old riverbed where their paths had first crossed, they stopped. Lone Hawk dismounted and turned to her. "This is where I leave you," he said. She hesitated. "You're not coming with me?" He shook his head. "My place is here. There are still stories to guard, and people who need to remember." She nodded slowly, understanding. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." He gave a small smile. "You listened to the land when others only looked for what it could give. That's thanks enough." She wanted to say more but found no words that could hold all the weight of what they had been through. Instead, she reached into her satchel and handed him a small silver locket, her father's. He would have wanted this to stay here. Lone Hawk accepted it with quiet respect. Closing his fingers around it, "Then it will rest with the others," he said. They stood in silence for a moment, the wind moving gently around them. Then she mounted her horse again. As she started toward the east, she looked back once more. Lone Hawk stood by the riverbed, tall and still, sun rising behind him like a flame. By the time she reached the small town at the edge of the desert, the world felt different. The people she passed on the street went about their days unaware of what had happened just beyond the hills. She stopped at the post office, sending a letter addressed to a distant historian, her father's friend. With only a few words inside, the truth was never lost. It was only waiting. Days turned into weeks. Life slowly returned to a rhythm, though the memory of that night stayed with her. She found herself drawn to the open land, riding out to the edges of the desert whenever she could. The air there carried something alive, a quiet pulse beneath the surface that she now understood. Sometimes she thought she could still hear the faint hum of the canyon beneath the wind. One evening, while watching the sunset, she opened the folded map one last time. The ink had faded even more, and the symbols that once glowed with mystery now seemed faint, almost gone. She smiled softly. It didn't need to guide her anymore. The story had ended where it began, in the heart of the land. She let the wind take the map from her hands, watching it drift across the sand until it disappeared. In that moment, she felt free, not from the past, but from the fear that had once held her there. Back in the canyon, far from any road or town, Lone Hawk stood beneath the arch. He placed the silver locket at the base of the stone, whispering a few words in his native tongue. The wind shifted gently, carrying the sound away. As he looked up, the carvings on the rock caught the last light of the setting sun, glowing faintly before fading back into shadow. He knew Eliza's journey had only begun. She had carried the burden of her family's secret and had returned it with respect. That was all the land ever asked to be remembered, not claimed. That night, he sat by his small fire, watching the stars appear one by one. The desert stretched endlessly before him, silent but alive. He thought of her somewhere beyond the horizon, beginning a new life. The world had changed, but not entirely. There would always be those who sought power and those who sought meaning. Yet for now, peace rested over the land. The map was gone, the secret safe once more. The canyon would sleep until someone worthy came again, guided not by greed but by heart. Lone Hawk closed his eyes, listening to the whispers of the wind. It carried stories old and new of loss, courage, and the unbreakable bond between people and the land they came from. And though no one would ever write this chapter in history books, the truth remained carved in stone and memory. It lived in the rhythm of the earth, in the quiet hearts that still listened, as dawn broke again over the endless desert. The first light touched the cliffs where the arch stood. For a moment, the carvings shimmered faintly, as if acknowledging the promise kept. Then the light faded into the sky, leaving behind only the stillness of a land that remembered everything. The story of the Apache warrior and the woman who carried the map became another whisper in the wind, a reminder that not all treasures are gold, and not all battles are fought with weapons. Some are fought with faith, respect, and the courage to protect what cannot be seen. And in that quiet truth, both of them had found what they were searching for all along: peace, top of form, bottom of form.